विराट हिंदुस्तान संघटनम् विश्वं कुर्यानीदमेकम् प्रथममस्तु आत्मशोधनम् हिन्दू बन्धूनां विपरिचयम् राष्ट्रभारत्यमस्तु द्वितीयम् इतिहासस्य सुष्ठुरक्षणम् विराट हिन्दुस्तान संघटनम् विश्वं कुर्यानीदमेकम् आद्यकर्तव्यतृतीयम् संस्कृतसाहित्यः पुरस्सारणम् हिन्दूहितार्थ आवश्यकमिदम् संस्कृतवाण्यः सुरक्षणम् सर्वजनैस्तु आत्मस्वरूपम् मनसा बुद्ध्या परीक्षणीयम् अर्थार्जनस्य धर्माधारम् दृढभवतु ज्ञेयं चतुर्थम् पञ्चेतरां राज्यं सुराज्यं राज्यप्रजानां निश्चयमेकम् इदं पञ्चकं भवतु ध्येयम् विराट हिंदुस्तान संघटनम् भारत माता की जय.
Beautiful.
Namaste everybody. Welcome to all our participants, our Chief Speaker, Dr. Sankhe ji, Jagdish Shetty ji. Welcome all of you for this very beautiful session of Abhyasika. So about our guest speaker today, our guest speaker is Shri Chaitanya Charan ji, who is a monk, an author, and a spiritual scientist. He has been a spiritual teacher for nearly 25 years in the Bhakti Yoga tradition of ISKCON. He is the author of 25 books that explain the relevance of Vedic wisdom texts, including the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. He is also an author of the world's only daily blog on Bhagavad Gita, which is gitadaily.com, where he has written about 4,000 articles on the Bhagavad Gita. He has been invited as a speaker at TEDx World Peace Conference of UNESCO, Intel, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Massachusetts, and Cambridge, and gives about 400 talks across 100 cities in 4 continents every year. So it is a great honor for all of us to have you today here, Chaitanya Charanji. I request you to kindly start with your speech. Thank you.
Thank you. ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जलिशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. So I'm grateful to be here with all of you today, and I'm especially grateful to Dr. Sankhe for giving me this opportunity. So I had read about this India syndrome and I wrote an article about it and I shared with him, and then he suggested that I speak on this topic. So I'll be having a PowerPoint and I'll be speaking 3 main points. If you would like to comment or question in between, after each point also I'll have a brief pause for questions, and at the end of course we will have some time for questions. So why is the West, the so-called India syndrome, why is the West biased against India? So I'll discuss 3 main points. What is this so-called India syndrome? What bigger issue does it point to? And what can we do, what can we do about it? So my main focus will be on the second and third part. So what is this India syndrome? This, as far as I know, it first appeared in the Guardian, and from their Guardian it was faithfully replicated by several Indian media outlets, other outlets also. So this was based on a book by a French psychiatrist, Reggie Arault. Crazy, now it could be, the book is in French, so it would translate crazy in India, crazy about India, crazy due to India. There can be different translations of it. So this book, it showed how, at least it gives some accounts of how tourists who came to India ended up becoming severely psychologically disturbed. So the article says that these people, some of them were so disturbed that they needed to be hospitalized, some of them needed to be treated, some of them had to be taken out of the country, sent back to their home country. Some of them were so lost that they were not even ready to go back to their country. So now this article raises several questions. So let's look at them one by one. First of all, what is the evidence? In general, there were no statistics given either in the article, or if you look at the broader book also, it's calling it an India syndrome. But statistically, how significant is this trend? There is no clear analysis or justification of that. There are no positive encounters in Indian spiritually highlighted. Let's look at this one by one. All that it gives is anecdotal accounts. Now, anecdotal accounts have their value, but their value primarily is in emotionally manipulating people. And if we consider our broad Indian culture, even if one person is facing some trouble in India, we are concerned about it. Our culture, the Atiti Devo Bhava. So anybody who is coming to our land, we don't want them to be disturbed or distressed. At the same time, what is the cause of the disturbance? It could be that those people were disturbed before and they already had some psychological disturbances, and those disturbances just erupted incidentally while they were in India. So now the book addresses this possibility, mentions this possibility, but in the end it just dodges that and says, oh, this is the India syndrome. So it's like nominally acknowledging the possibility but not considering that possibility very seriously. One of the biggest challenges whenever we are making reason, we do any kind of reasoning or debate, is that are we approaching the intelligence of people or are we manipulating the emotions of people? So anecdotal accounts which are provided without any broader perspective, they are generally meant to create fear or anger or negativity at the emotional level. And that's why any serious sociological research, anecdotal accounts are not taken very seriously. It's not that they are neglected, but how frequent are these? In what context are these? That has to be considered. Now, one contextualization is through statistics. We consider, they say dozens of people have experienced it. Okay, dozens seems to be a significant number, but how significant is it considering that 17 million people come to India annually? And this number has grown dramatically over the last 10 years, since we have a government which is much more conducive to India's dharmic culture, India's spirituality. So it has provided many more support systems. So the tourists were about 5 million 10 years ago, and now they are more than three times. So has the number of cases increased with a significant percentage? There's not much statistical analysis of that. So does dozens among 17 million, does it merit so much significant coverage? So this raises some serious questions about the intent. So generally speaking, we don't want to look at the intent of what somebody is doing. Let's look at the content of the argument and deal with that. But when the content itself is given without a broader context, then why are you focusing on this? That question actually comes up. Another problem is that there are no positive accounts given. If we consider, there are millions of people who come to India, and many people have been transformed positively. Many of the leaders of Silicon Valley, they came to India. I mentioned a few names over here, and they had very positive experiences in India. Julia Roberts is of the famous Eat, Pray, Love book, and movies also there on that. So both males and females have come to India, and they have had positive experiences, enormously positively transformative experiences. But those are not highlighted at all. And these people came as spiritual seeking. If you consider at from one perspective, India is not, especially if somebody is coming as a spiritual tourist, it is not the most comfortable place to come to. And yet people are coming. Nobody is forcing them to come. They're coming because they're getting something positive over here. So there is no only anecdotal incident without any positive accounts, no positive possible explanations, no broader explanations. So what does it point to? What bigger issue does it point to? Like we may say that there is something called Stockholm syndrome, which, okay, it occurred because a case was found in Stockholm of a person who was persecuted, and that person became attached to the persecutor. But that doesn't mean we consider all the people in Stockholm are like that now. So using a generic term like India syndrome, what does it signify? So now I had myself given the subtitle is, why is the West biased against India? So I would like to nuance that there are difference between biases and stereotypes. So what is the difference? You could say at one level, they are two fairly different things. Stereotypes are more or less fixed and reductionistic conceptions. Oh, these people like this. Oh, these people are very miserly. These people are very manipulative. These people are very aggressive. These people are fanatical. So these are stereotypes. These are reductionistic conceptions. That means we reduce an entire demographic to a particular quality. And how does that happen? These people have few experiences with a small number of people, but those experiences are heavily formative. That shapes their opinions, that shapes their perceptions. That's stereotype. To some extent, stereotypes are unavoidable because we humans can't interact with an infinite number of people. So from finite samples, we do make generalizations. But stereotypes are bad at one level, but biases are worse. What are biases? Biases are, you can say, the negative emotion-driven dispositions. So biases are not just because conceptions, they are emotion-driven. And these people are like this, and that's how they are. So even if somebody is presented some contrary evidence, they'll just dismiss that. No. Those people are just making a show. Actually, they're fanatical, or actually they are arrogant. Actually, they are like this. But some people make a show like that. They reject contrary evidence, and they highlight whatever evidence is supporting. So stereotypes, they can be changed. Not easy, but they're not too difficult to change. But biases are extremely difficult to change. Why? Because that person is emotionally fixated on a particular perception. There's an American comedian who said that, I have already made up my mind. Now, don't confuse me with the facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. Well, then how have you made up your mind? So that is indicative of bias. Now, in general, whenever we see people speaking negatively about us, it is best to start with giving them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe are these people biased, or are they operating on some stereotypes? So to understand this, the West itself is a very, very big, you could say, geographical spread. By the West, what do we mean? Are we meaning UK? Are we meaning America? Are we meaning Australia? Are we meaning New Zealand? So West itself is very broad. Now, it does share some common attributes, but still it's very broad. So I will focus primarily on UK and America over here when I talk about the West. So now if you consider the average Westerner, they have more stereotypes than biases. Stereotypes and biases. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, people had the stereotypes that India is the land of snake charmers. Now very few people now, as Indians have settled in the America and people have interacted with Indians, they don't have that stereotype right now. But there are other stereotypes that have come up in their places. But now what happens with stereotypes? You could say the average Westerners are in general aware that stereotypes can be wrong and we should avoid stereotypes. So for example, I was once giving a talk, and at that time I just mentioned how gossip spreads and how misconceptions spread. And I was talking, many of you may have heard of the game of Chinese whispers. The Chinese whispers is what that I was giving this talk in Washington. So Chinese whisper is what one person speaks something to the second person, then second person speaks to third person. And by the time it comes to 10th person, it has become completely different, distorted, exaggerated. That Chinese whisper. So then after that, the organizer of the program told me, don't use the word Chinese whisper. This is because it is derogatory to Chinese people. It is not that only Chinese people do like this. Anybody can do like that. So I appreciate that caution, and I avoid that henceforth. And it was not that this person was particularly favorable to Chinese people. This person, proper American, it organized a program for me, an Indian monk. So, but the point is, it's not that the average Westerner is biased against India. They have stereotypes, and they're also aware of stereotypes. In general, where ignorance can be a satisfactory explanation, there is no need to presume malevolence. Ignorance means those people don't know. Malevolence means they want to destroy us. So if ignorance can be a reasonable explanation, malevolence doesn't have to be considered an explanation. So now with this understanding, I'm not saying that there are people who are not biased. There are people who are biased also. But it is not that average Westerner is necessarily operating under biases. Now beyond that, in the West, the left and the right are very prominent political groups. So I'll try to, in the West, are there biases among the influential groups? We could say in the West there is the left and then there is the right. The left are largely socialists and the right are largely Christian conservatives. So for example, in America, there are two political parties, the Republican and the Democrat. So Democrats are largely left-oriented and the Republicans are largely right-oriented. So now both of them have some strong perceptions about India. So what we are trying to do is that when we encounter negative perceptions from the West about India, where are they coming from? And in the last section, we'll discuss what we can do about it. Now, among the left, what is the left and the right over here? Basically, the left are people who are always against any kind of hierarchies. They are people who are concerned about those who are left behind by the existing hierarchies. So they feel that, this power structure, this person is left aside, this person is exploited, how can we help them? So that is the positive side of the left. And the right are those who are concerned about what is right with the current system. Don't just change it. A lot of things are working properly. Don't just indiscriminately change it. That's a broad understanding of left and right. Now, so how does the American left perceive India? So I'll talk about two things: perception of Indians and perception of India. Now, why am I differentiating the two things? Because when I'm talking about Indians, quite often in the West, their perception primarily happens by interacting with Indians in the West. Now, the average Westerner may not meet Indians in India. So their perception of Indians is shaped by their interaction with Indians. Their attitude toward India is shaped by what they read in the news, what movies they watch, and stuff like that. So when what are their attitude towards Indians? Indians in the West are hugely successful. Indians and Chinese are probably among the most influential and wealthy, at least among the most materially wealthy and successful minorities in America. They're very successful. Now, because of this, what has happened is Indians are often seen as a part of the privileged elite. And the attitude sometimes becomes negative toward them. So they are, in general, the left are supportive of the minorities. But what happens is Indians, although Indians are in minority, but Indians are successful. So they say, okay, you are not an underprivileged minority. You are not a discriminated minority. And that's why they are much more favorable to Muslims. Any criticism of Islam is immediately labeled as Islamophobia. And they are sympathetic to Latinos and especially toward blacks. So now, of course, how much they want to help the minorities or they want to use the minorities to further their own political interests, that's a different issue. But broadly speaking, their attitude is they're not very sympathetic towards Indians because they see Indians as a part of the successful elite. So just a few last 2-3 years, there was a elaborate court case going on with respect to Indians and Chinese, especially Indians, parents suing the Ivy League universities. Because what happened was, even if the Indian student has a 5 out of 5 CGPA, still that student will not get admission in the university. Whereas somebody with even a 4.3 or 4.4 CGPA, if that person is from the black or Latino demographic, that person will get admission. So Indians are perceived somewhat negatively because they are successful. Now, as far as their attitude toward India is concerned, they will think that, oh, India is the place where there's this discriminatory caste system. And this is perpetuated by the Brahmins orthodoxy. So this is a place of discrimination. Now, if you consider the lived reality of India, in most urban places, the caste system is hard. The caste is hardly a very important factor. Yes, in the villages, it is prominent, and especially it is because of politicking that caste becomes very important. But otherwise, in today's India, caste is not that important a factor, but that's their perception. Now, what is the attitude of the right? That's how the American left perceives India. Now, how does the American right perceive India? The right especially means these are conservative Christians. So the lefts are prominently in America. They say there's a division between the coastal and the central. So mostly the left is New York, Washington, LA, San Francisco. These cities are very much dominated by the left. And the central parts of America, it could be Arizona, then Texas, then Florida. These are all quite dominated by the right. So how do they perceive Indians? As far as Indians are concerned, oh, you are successful, that is good. But if they are successful, what happens is they are seen as threats to, or at least non-candidates for Christian evangelism. Because in one sense, Christians have been evangelizing among the minorities quite a lot. I was invited for an interfaith conference in DC, and they told me that they have churches for special denominations. That means there are separate churches for people who are from Mexico. There are separate churches for people who are from Brazil, in their language, with their food. So somehow they have not been able to make any churches specifically for Indians. Indians who go to the West, what happens is they are either so interested in material success and they're so happy with the material success that they're not interested in religion much. Or if they become interested in religion, they want to learn more about their own religion. And that's where I'll come to the opportunity that we have a little later. So the American right also has some negative attitude towards Indians because they are either non-candidates for evangelism or they are threats. And what is their attitude towards India? It is India they see, or at least they would like to propagate it that way, is a place where Christian rights are being oppressed. The churches are being attacked, the minorities are being troubled. Now again, how much is it a reality? Well, very little. The Catholic Pope also acknowledged that the India and Africa are probably are the richest fields for the harvesting of souls. Harvesting of souls means that they want to convert people in India, and they are converting it mass. But still, they see it like that and they propagate it like that. Now, of course, there may be a few incidents that happen. We don't deny that. But quite often, those incidents are not so much targeted against Christians per se by right-wing Hindus. They're just routine crimes that may happen against anyone, and they are portrayed as attacks on the minorities, Christians. So that's how the American right perceives India. And through this overall, so the two influential groups in the West, whether it is left or right, both of them operate with a significant level of preconceptions, many of which are negative. And of course, within this, there are a few people who are aggressively negative, who are like on almost seem to be like on an anti-India crusade. But they don't represent the majority, and they certainly don't represent the entirety of the Western attitude towards India. Now, of course, everything is not negative. There are positive perceptions and positive opportunities also. If you look at the left, there are many in the left who are fed up with capitalism driven initiatives. So capital driven medicine, agribusiness, and commercialized religion. The Christians have mega churches. So there are these people say Eastern spirituality. By East they include both China and India, but Eastern spirituality is much more open, much more broad-minded. It is in general, when spiritual seekers come to India, most of the spiritual seekers who come to India are from the left. Very few people from the right come to India as spiritual seekers. That's why I mentioned, if all the 4 people I mentioned are the Steve Jobs, Julia Roberts, Larry Page, all of them, if you look at their political orientations, all 4 of them are quite leftist. So on one side, the left in some ways is against Indian hierarchies, but the left is what is most receptive to India as a source of alternative knowledge systems, alternative spirituality, alternative religious practices, alternative medicines. So yoga is also very popular among the left, not so much among the right. Although, of course, it is becoming so popular now that even Christians are recognizing. So there is a whole group, they call it as Christian yoga. Initially, they said yoga is Hindu and it's a heathen practice and Christians should not do it. But eventually they realize that it has health benefits and Christians are anyway going to do it. So they try to appropriate it and say there's something called Christian yoga. But in general, if Indians are able to connect with Westerners, or Westerners come to India, most of the Westerners who come to India as spiritual seekers or even have any kind of interest in India, they are largely from the left. At the same time, the right, with respect to the right also, there are some common grounds we can work on. There are, the right, as I said, they are mostly conservative Christians. So there can be atheism, there can be nihilism. Nihilism is basically nothing has any meaning. Life is completely meaningless. And in fact, there was one atheist philosopher, you can call him not a philosopher, but he's a philosopher. Philosopher is one who gives sophistry of fools. Philosopher. So he said, life is meaningless and miserable. The only philosophical question worth asking is whether to commit suicide today or tomorrow. Because life is meaningless and miserable. That's Alberto Camus. He said that. Now he wrote many books and he said, okay, don't commit suicide today, live on today. He was one of proponents of what is called as existentialism. But the point is, nihilism is very damaging. And it is often religion and spirituality that are sources of meaning. So there are areas where we could also work together. Say, for example, there are fundamental religious rights of people which need to be protected. Everybody has the right to worship according to their own faith. That is something which we can work together. So at one level, I'm associated with ISKCON, I'm a monk in ISKCON. So there are times when ISKCON was organized, ISKCON as an organization was labeled by certain people as being a cultist organization for brainwashing people. So at that time, there are many Christian groups who had studied ISKCON, and they said this is not a cult. This is an ancient religion, ancient tradition. Now they didn't really sympathize with ISKCON or with Krishna Bhakti or Hinduism per se, but they recognized that if today one religion can be labeled as a cult, tomorrow we may also be labeled as a cult. So in that sense, there are common interests which we can have even with the right. So having said this, now what can we do about this? So there are a lot of negative conceptions, there are a few biases. So how can we rectify this? Are there any comments or questions at this point? Or should I complete this and then we can open for questions or comments?
Yeah, I think you completed.
Okay, thank you. So I'll talk about 3 things, what we can do. 3 C's: consolidate, cultivate, and communicate. So consolidate, let's look at these 3 C's. What I mean by this: consolidate means actually we have a lot of resources available for us. Whatever resources we have, we can unify and utilize those resources. And one of the biggest resources we have are our NRIs, non-resident Indians, who are situated in various parts of the world. And China is far, far better in utilizing its people who are settled in the West than India is. In India, we often lament, oh, people who go to the West, or they're just, it's an example of brain drain. Or we think, oh, you people must be wealthy, you give us some donations for our causes. Well, okay. Yes, if those people could have been in India and they could have helped India develop, that's possible, that's wonderful. But they can help India develop and give India an influential voice even by being in the West. So if they can become potential spokespersons for the positives of India, then we can consolidate those resources. I have traveled at least to 25-30 countries across the world and spent a good amount of time in about 10-15 countries. And whichever country I've gone to, I have seen Indians are highly respected. Indians are respected as hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding, responsible. One of my friends in America is a traffic cop, and he told me that I hardly ever have to pull over any Indian kids for speeding. And even if I pull them over, they are very regretful. And Indians don't become homeless, Indians don't become criminals. I'm not saying it's again general. This is Indians have an ethos. So that point is Indians are respected. Now, of course, respect can come with envy also. Oh, you're so successful, I want to be successful. But India, NRIs are actually a big resource if we want to change the perception of India in the West. And what China has done with respect to this is remarkable. What China does is that they actually have a systematic track record, a database of who are the top students from China who go to American universities. And the Chinese government has departments dedicated to interacting with these students and engaging them in some kind of China activism. Not overtly, but at least covertly. So, and this is not just something which we can do, but this is also what NRIs want. Many times when Indians go to the West, initially they enjoy the freedom over there. Oh, there are no parents, no elders, no inhibitive culture. I just want to enjoy life. But that phase doesn't last for very long, maybe 5 years, 10 years. Once they get married and settle down, they start realizing that actually this is not the kind of culture I want my children to grow up in. And that's when they start trying to transmit Indian culture and Indian values to their children. And that's when they start looking for what is Indian culture and what is Indian values, because they themselves don't know it very well. So if we could align, if we can connect with them, then that can be a significant influencer. So so when in the West, this is called as advocacy, and advocacy groups are there. So major religions, Jews, for example, have very influential advocacy groups. Islam also has created a lot of advocacy groups. Advocacy groups means what? That these are in Muslims in influential positions, and they advocate, they seek support, and they exert pressure for furthering important causes for Muslims. So we actually India already has a rich resource base in terms of Indians in very influential positions in the West. Now we may say, oh, they don't have any patriotism. Well, not necessarily. Some of them maybe, but not many. Many of them are quite open. That's consolidation. And second is cultivate. What do you mean by cultivate? There are influencers who already appreciate India, and there are young people who are quite interested in Indian spirituality, and they may want to enter the field of social influence. So these need to be cultivated. These need to be cultivated so that give positive perceptions of India. So, for example, I was talking with an editor of Times of India recently, and he said that, I see that you give, although the Catholic Church is a minority church, in number of Christians are so few, there are so many news about the church which come in the mainstream media, but there are so few news about Hindu organizations or Hindu festivals or Hindu causes. So they told me that, if I want to report about some event in the church, I know their spokesperson. They have come and met me. They have spent time with me. I know whom to contact, and they are eager to contact me. With most Hindu organizations, I don't even know whom to contact. So now it is not true for all Hindu organizations, but the point is there are influencers, and not everybody is biased. So if we can cultivate them, that's very helpful. And another thing is, there's a big difference. Another demographic that we could consider is Jews. The Jews are probably among the most persecuted minorities in world history, but still they have become very influential. And one reason they have become influential is that they have entered into fields of social influence. So law, journalism, media. What has happened is, Indians, on the other hand, have excelled in many fields, but those fields don't necessarily have they don't change public perception on important issues. So Indians often go in the software, and actually this is STEM. We go into STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, math. So in these fields, we don't influence public opinion much, public opinion, social issues. So we need to cultivate people who can influence. If somebody wants to choose a career in any of these fields like journalism and media in the West, the parents also need to encourage them. And not just in the West, even in India, successful, these kind of careers are encouraged, then eventually we will have voices over there. And last is communicate. By communicate, what I mean is that there are people who have positive experiences of India and Indian spirituality. That may be Indians here in India, that may be Indians who visit from the West and come to India and go back, Indians who have settled in America or in the West and they have had good experience in their childhood. Much of Indian discourse centers often on how the West is so biased, how the West treats India so unfairly. It focuses often on complaints and condemnations. And after some time, that just becomes tiresome. People feel this is just a victim narrative, is a tired narrative. Yes, is India victimized? Yes, but everybody claims to be victimized. So after some time, people just get bored by this. People just turn off because of this. So among Christians, there is a minority group called Mormons, and these Mormons, their founder practiced polygamy, and because of that, and because of those and some other practices, they were pursued very negatively in the West, in America itself. But there was one Christian girl, Mormon girl specifically. She was in her late teens, and she was a good author. So when she was around 21, 22, she wrote her autobiography of growing in a Mormon family. And it was not like simply completely whitewashed, but it's a first person account. And that book became a New York Times bestseller. And what happened by that is, it significantly changed the American mainstream perception of Mormonism. Is this a narrow-minded, bigoted religion? No, it's not necessarily like that. There may be some people like that. But if you consider, are there any books like that? Say Hindus who have gone to the West. No, I'm not talking about Hindu saints and the autobiography of a yogi or books like that written by spiritual leaders. I'm talking about lay Hindus who are successful in their businesses, who are successful in their careers. They write something about spirituality. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's relatively less. So if we can become more forthcoming in sharing our experiences, just complaining that the narrative is unfair, is biased, is negative, that will not in the long run change the narrative so much. We need to provide a positive narrative. As we provide a positive narrative more and more, then gradually what will happen is the negative narrative will change. And one big advantage of the social media as it has erupted, as it expanded, is that social media in many ways is much more democratic than what is called as a legacy media. Legacy media means today, even if I write a well-articulated letter protesting against the Guardian's coverage, not only will Guardian not publish the article, if I write one, Guardian may not even publish my letter. It completely depends on them. Now, we can try to create our own newspapers and our own media, but through social media, it's possible to reach a large number of people. So if we can just encourage that ethos of communication, let's share. Not that we have to be rose tinted and share only the positives, but there are a lot of positives. When you share them, that can lead to a significant difference. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna concludes by telling Arjuna to arise. Arjuna is rejected. He has put aside his bow, but at the end of the Gita, Arjuna picks up his bow and is ready to fight. So that call to arise is for every one of us. Ultimately, it's a confrontation between ideas. We need to rationally articulate the good that our ideas bring to the table, not emotionally militate against others' negative ideas about us. What happens is, often the responses, when they're emotionally driven and they're negative, there are protests and criticisms and condemnations. They only further the narrative that Hindus are reactionary and right-wing extremists who can't tolerate criticism, and we play into their hands. Instead, as we start rationally articulating, then this can make a significant difference. And there is a lot of potential for this to happen, as our younger generation is through three things, I would say. Younger generation is much more savvy about social media. Younger generation is also, although you may say they're distracted by social media, but they're active on social media. And they are also, in one sense, receptive to a wide variety of influences. So if the influences from our tradition, our culture come through, they can not only receive them, but they can transmit them. And the opportunity is huge through YouTube, through Facebook, through social media, through Quora. If we start sharing the positive narrative, who knows? It takes just one video to become viral, and then so many people can watch it, and then it becomes like a snowballing effect in a positive direction. So there's no need to just become angry or dejected or frustrated. There is a lot of hope for positivity, that India is rising, and not just in the political or the economic domain, but even in the domain of ideas. We can rise, and that is where our spiritual legacy can play a very distinctive role. And this is not just to defend India, but actually that India can contribute something valuable to the world. And we want to help in the world scenario. If the negative perception of India decrease, then it's not just that it's our national pride that is maintained, but India has much to offer to the world, which can help make the world a better place. And just as hearing the Bhagavad Gita helped Arjuna to rise, similarly, we all can rise by looking at the current world and seeing what we can do in our own small way to bring about a positive change. So I'll summarize. I spoke broadly, three things today. First thing was, we discussed what is the India syndrome. It is a report of a few people suffering emotional disorders or psychological disturbances after visiting India. So it is statistically insignificant. It is mostly anecdotal. There's no much consideration of previous circumstances that might have caused it. And there is no description of positive experiences, positive transfer experiences people have had. Now, what does this point to? Is that the West is biased against India? Well, more than biases, there are stereotypes. Biases are very strong, emotionally driven, negative dispositions, whereas stereotypes are small experiences generalized too much. And we discussed about how in the West, the right and the left both have certain stereotypes. The left see Indians as a part of the elite because of being successful, and India as part of the discriminatory caste system. The right sees India as, we are not candidates for conversion, and we oppress Christians in India. But there are avenues for reaching out to both of them. That alternative spirituality, alternative medicine, alternative wisdom traditions. The left is interested in that. And the right, there are shared causes such as fighting atheism, nihilism, other such things, can work together. And to be able to work together, how can we counter the biases or stereotypes that are there? Three things. We consolidate. That is, we already have a lot of resources which need to be brought together. One of them is our NRIs. And second is cultivate. Those who can influence society, we need to cultivate them carefully, give them time. And those among our youth also who have that ability, cultivate them. Help them understand Indian spirituality so they can share it. And last is we communicate. The first person, just as the anecdotes in this book have had and have they influence people negatively, so we also share anecdotes, share our personal experiences, and that's a very powerful testimony. And we all can, just as Arjuna arose on studying understanding the Bhagavad Gita, we all can arise and do our part in shifting the narrative about India. Thank you very much. Are there any reflections, questions, comments?
ऑडियंस में से किसी को क्वेश्चन है? Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Danut, Prabhu, this is Nikhil here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So, like touching on the point on the last slide where you talk about Arise Arjuna. So I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of what is to be done. But again, then there's the problem of mindset. You were talking about how Jews got into avenues where they're able to influence. So you could also probably add finance in as one of those categories through which they influence. And also, so just being in those positions may not necessarily help, but then also having a mindset along with it that we need to collectively come together and promote our common interests. So what I see in the Indian diaspora abroad is mainly they are behind material, you can say, sustenance or growing materially. But when it comes to coming together on such issues, we may be a bit lacking. So this is more a comment than a question. So I knew somebody who was the General Secretary of Hindu Forum of Britain. So he was sharing something with me. So he said if he wanted to meet the Home Secretary of UK, he would call up the Home Secretary's office, book an appointment, and go and meet the Home Secretary. Similarly, there was a Jewish body like the Hindu Forum of Britain. If the secretary of the Jewish body wanted to meet the Home Secretary, he would call the office and the Home Secretary would come and meet the secretary of the Jewish body. So numbers matter, but it's more that mindset and how you are able to organize yourself better matters more. That is my comment. Thank you, Prabhu, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you. Yeah, it's true. In one sense, if you see, broadly Indians, we have had to survive through centuries of foreign rule. And because of that, what has happened is we have learned to focus on individual success and individual excellence. Whatever be the system, there's a lot of resilience. Whatever the system is bad, somehow we will find our way and we will move ahead. But the idea of changing the system itself, that maybe in the British rule and before that in the Islamic rule, the possibility itself was not there so much. So that is not generally the focus. So Indians, that in general, what happens is, now again, I don't want to generalize because India is a large country and there is There's so many people with different mentalities. But in general, the idea is that we focus on our individual success, maybe our family, our extended family success, protection, but not as a broader way of influencing society. But that will change. It will change gradually as we recognize it more and more. Yeah, but right now, India is not, in the Indian voice is not that much respected. It's not that much considered a very serious voice. So it is a sad reality. But I think as we consolidate more and more, it will happen. Kamlesh Sankheji has made the point that NRI source must be used, but we need to do a lot in India itself. I agree fully, because this is an article which had come in the Guardian, and from there it spread to the Indian media. So that's why we are focused more on why is the West biased against India. And that's why we talked about NRI. But yes, in India itself, a lot of awareness needs to be spread, and there is a lot of opportunity also for that. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Sankhe.
Yeah, so from the discussion, I'm just taking the thread further, that the phenomenon of Indians focusing on their individual growth, family. Indians are typically jugadus, they call, they will do something, and somehow they will survive, and so they will go ahead. And naturally, that's a very good quality. At the same time, one of our very close friends of VHS, Dr. Vaidyanathan, he talks about a concept of Vaishyaization of every varna. That means a Brahmin is also focused on just earning money. A Kshatriya is also focused on earning money. Vaishya was already into it. So it's like a Vaishya mentality of just, having your own thing full. Now what, see, organizations like ISKCON, Shri Shri, many organizations, Ramdev, they are focusing on the intellectual part, the Brahminical kind of upliftment. But the second part, which is like the Kshatriyas, the Kshatriya intellect, in the modern scenario, it's not take out a sword and all. It's just the intellect of having the mindset that I can change the system. See, Kshatriyas mean they would create a system. They would sort of, according to the guidance provided to them by the sadhus and the scriptures, and change the system. So that is something, how do you think that can be brought about, that Kshatriya mindset?
Yeah, it's difficult. Okay, I write a lot on the Bhagavad Gita. So one of the things which in the pandemic I have been doing a lot of research on is political philosophy. And I did a search on the internet. I found, if you look at for Bible and political philosophy, Quran and political philosophy, you look at even the art of war and political philosophy, there are books. If you look at Bhagavad Gita and political philosophy, there are practically no books. So in my understanding, there are 2-3 things over here. At one level, if you see, there was the spiritual resurgence in India that happened from the 14th, 15th century onwards, when there were many saints. In Maharashtra, there was Tukaram Maharaj and Namdev, and Sant Namdev, and many others. Similarly, in Bengal, there were Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and others. So that's where most of modern Hinduism has been shaped on the foundation of the Bhakti resurgence. And that time, the overall ethos was on individual spiritual development. And that legacy has been carried on. So India has a very rich philosophical and spiritual tradition. How that philosophical tradition or spiritual philosophical tradition can be brought into a intellectual discourse with current say socio-political arrangements, current social issues, there is not much on that. So this is an area where I would say that even as an organization like ISKCON or other organizations, we also need to work a lot more on this. We can talk on Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, but consider, I was recently when the pandemic happened, I did a series of talks on grief and grieving, how to deal with grief. And I searched, there's not a single Hindu book on grieving. I'm working on something right now, but Christians have at least 25 bestsellers on how to deal with grief from a biblical perspective. So somehow what has happened is the philosophy as a matter of philosophy, religion, spirituality as a matter of individual practice has been talked about quite a bit. But how do we engage this with the broader social issues? That has not been discussed. And there are many reasons for this. One major reason is that India as a country decided not to have any religious studies department after it became independent. Every country has a religious studies department. But India, because we were born through the very painful experience of partition, we said that let's put religion aside completely. And somehow many of the traditional religious structures, whether we are traditional, they support building temples, but they don't really support religious education in terms of serious engagement, intellectual engagement with current issues. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is that, so what the Abhyasika that you are having, this is something which is very important initiative in that sense, where we engage at an intellectual level with current issues. But a lot more work is required in that direction. And there's something you could say, like you can say Hindu or Vedic or Indic think tanks, which actually deal with contemporary issues in a substantial way. We will need that quite a bit in future. So that is one way that can happen. Another thing is that now, of course, Chanakya, many people refer to Chanakya, and Chanakya is seen as a resource of political wisdom. At the same time, there is a lot more available in the tradition, and how Chanakya's teachings can be applied today, that also needs a lot more elaboration, analysis, contemplation. So that's one reason you could say Kshatriya, how the spiritual philosophical wisdom can be applied for the Kshatriyas, that has not been discussed so much. Another aspect could be that I don't want to sound offensive over here, that somehow we Indians have acquired a strongly negative stereotype about politicians. That one of the first quotes that many Indians will know is politics is the last resort of scoundrels. That's among the best quotes people will know. Well, okay, but the fact is that power corrupts. And the people who say that politicians are corrupt, those people, if they were given that level of power, there's no guarantee that they will not become corrupt also. So we may say that we are not interested in politics, but politics is interested in us, in the sense that politics is going to influence us. So in that sense, political engagement is important. How we engage, that may vary from person to person, but a more active engagement in political situations, not just politicking as manipulation and things like that, but a more active political engagement. See, there is more of a lot of people are interested in political news and also in political views, you can say. But in terms of active political engagement to bring about a substantial change, I think more of our thought leaders, more intellectuals, more intellectually oriented people need to enter into politics. There's some survey which I forget now. Now, what is the average education level of, say, the members of the various assemblies, legislative assemblies in America or UK, and what is the education level of the people who are representative political leaders in India? So in India, it was substantially lesser. Now, I'm not saying education is a solution, that education itself will make somebody better, but that indicates what kind of people are actually choosing to enter into politics. So I think politics as a viable means for social change, that also needs to be recognized adequately and chosen. Of course, it's difficult, and politics can be a difficult, you could say, even a dirty business at times. But then in one sense, Bhagavad Gita says that sarvarambhahi doshena, every endeavor is covered by fault. Nothing is in this world pure. That would be another point. I'm sure you can add quite a few more things. These are just some of my thoughts.
Beautiful, very wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Jagdish ji, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Namaste ji. My question is, it has been observed and already remarked, and especially with some of the scholars who are there and who go from here, that various Hindu groups, there are numerous Hindu groups. There may be some Telugu group, Kannada group, Marathi group, or some temple groups, or various other types of Hindu or Indian groups. But when it comes to all these threats or onslaught or this phobia business, none of our groups or our visiting, I would say, religious leaders who have big influence in the US, none of these religious leaders or the various groups think of the issue together. And especially recently, when some of the universities were having this Hindu phobia business, none of them got united the way they should have got united. So in spite of we having so many influence groups, Hindu organizations, none of them are united and cohesive tackling these issues, even visiting saints or acharyas or even Shankaracharyas or whoever. I would not say Shankaracharyas because none of them visit abroad, perhaps, but those who visit, none of them are leading this battle in a very systematic way. So what is happening is piecemeal these things some people articulate, but we as a Hindu or an Indian group is not tackling this issue effectively. There may be some who may be doing it, but by and large, including Rajiv Malhotra was very unhappy. He says that I have been breaking my heads for decades, and he is more worried about our groups, our various thought processes not being in proper place. So because you are traveling there very often and you must be visiting various groups, I wanted to know your views on this.
Yes, that is a sad reality that many Indian spiritual teachers are not concerned too much with bigger social issues. Now again, there are multiple reasons for this. One of the biggest reasons is that maybe we as a group have, I'm talking about this from a what we can do as a solution perspective. Maybe we Hindus have outsourced too much of our expectations or too much responsibility to our spiritual teachers. What I mean by that is that if I talked earlier about Christian think tanks, none of the Catholic or even the Protestant think tanks, hardly any of them have any the Pope or any bishops or pastors. These are lay Christians, but they have gained influence over time. So of course, if the spiritual teachers speak something supportive, that itself is helpful. But eventually, what happens is, if a spiritual teacher or spiritual guru or a charismatic guru gets involved in a particular issue, sometimes they may not be that well informed about the issue. And then they make a certain statement, and their statement can be used or misused to condemn the whole tradition. So for example, consider the Aryan invasion theory. There are a lot of problems with that. But there are 2-3 Hindu gurus who wrote books criticizing the Aryan invasion theory. And their followers propagated that books quite extensively. But what happened was, those Hindu gurus were not scholars. And their books had problems with them, logical problems, evidential problems. And what happened was, their books became the primary representatives of what the Hindu right does. And then that became further targets for criticism. So my understanding would be that, yes, at one level, if the spiritual teachers could galvanize their followers to take up this, it would be good. But beyond that, it is Indian spirituality is not the responsibility of the spiritual leaders alone. It is more of the community, the congregation, who has to take it up. individuals have to take it up. And in my understanding, no spiritual leader who has some awareness will oppose it. They may not themselves take it as a priority, but in general, it doesn't happen in most traditions. That those who are spiritual teachers, whether they will take it up, I don't really know. If you look at the Indian tradition, also we look at, say, Shivaji Maharaj. He was blessed by the saints, but it was he who took up the responsibility of establishing the challenge against the atrocities of Aurangzeb. So overall, I think that it is upon the responsibility of the lay Hindus to take it up more and more, because India has been a land of many different spiritual paths, and to expect them to become united, what happens is, it is only when you could say that we use the word congregation or community. I mean, those are not directly spiritual teachers, but those are living in the world. But their concerns about the world are much more. So they are much more concerned about the world. So when they come together, so for example, Hindu leader from say Advaitik Sampradaya and Advaitik Sampradaya, for them to come together will be very difficult. But for a Hindu congregation member, somebody might belong to a organization that is Advaitik, somebody might be belonging to a organization that is Dvaitik. But for both of them, they both have their careers, they both have their families. For them to come together will be relatively easier, because their affiliation with the tradition is not so much controlled by the tradition's past. So I would say that is the realistic way ahead. And if we can focus on expecting less from the spiritual teachers and taking up more responsibility for unification and consolidation in the hands of the congregation. Okay.
Thank you.
Madhuri, you had some question?
Prabhuji, I can ask one question.
Do we have time?
Yeah, you can ask one last question.
Okay.
Prabhuji,
So you are talking about politics and the spiritual involvement into politics. Do you think that Srimad Dasbodh, which was written by Sri Ramdas Swami for the general public, and since he was also the guru of Shivaji Maharaj, and if we see that I think Shivaji Maharaj can be considered as the intellectual Kshatriya of recent times. So when we were talking about the Kshatriyatva and the intellectualism, political intellectualism, do you think that Srimad Dasbodh should be taken up as an ideal book?
Well, it's not so much a matter of what I think. It is how we present that wisdom, how we whether a particular book can contain wisdom, but it has to be presented in the contemporary language, not just English, but in the terms, in the conceptual framework that requires hard work. So, I mean, we'll have to discuss specifically about the merits of particular books to see how much they can be contributing. I would say that it requires a serious study of the traditional text and a significantly serious study of the contemporary issues, and then see how the two can be brought in terms of dialogue. It is like there's one Indian politician said that Bhagavad Gita contains the solution to all problems. Well, in terms of getting some claps from people, that kind of statement is nice. But from religious people, okay, how does Bhagavad Gita offer solutions to problems? That has to be tangibly shown. This is what the Bhagavad Gita is teaching. And if this is how we apply the principles of the Gita, this is how this problem can be solved. So there's a lot of, I would say, effort required to actually bring traditional texts to present traditional texts in a way that they can offer tangible pathways for dealing with contemporary issues. That is your question?
Yeah, one last question from Praveen.
yes. So, Prabhuji, from the Western point of view, the Abrahamic thought process is so deep rooted in their academics, in their universities and in their political ambition also. So it is not, they do not recognize the Eastern religion. It is just a feel-good factor, which they want to digest actually. And the so-called Indians, they confine whatever knowledge they have for their own, own tradition, family, culture, whatever it is, but not for standing strong on those or expanding them into various geographies. Earlier it has been done. We have seen basically how our culture has gone to Thailand, Malaysia, and till Japan, actually everywhere. But recently we find that this is not happening. And one of the reasons could be basically people are not able to differentiate what is Sanatana Dharma, and they're not able to differentiate how this Abrahamic religion are planning directly their deterioration and uprooting them from the root actually. And this is happening at all different levels in terms of regulations, in terms of policies, in terms of global, even universities basically when they profile the books, they don't profile something books which they consider as right wings. So I mean to say, how do we make our generations aware, like as Rajiv Malhotra tells about, being different. So this, can you just answer this one? Yeah. Because they feel they read Bhagavad Gita, but it's more of a feel good, it's more of a psychological, it's more of a getting over their problems. But when it comes to this question, they're not able to tackle how is the difference between Quran, how Christians are thinking about them actually. When somebody is thinking about you as a kafir and infidel, it is very difficult for a person who does not know anything about them, and they can't plan any war strategy actually.
That is true. I would say there are two different things. First is that the Abrahamic faiths have had a huge amount of historical influence in the West. At the same time, presently, their influence has waned substantially. Most of Europe is functionally atheistic now. There is a fear that with a lot of Islamic immigration happening, the future is Europe may go toward Islam. But right now, Europe is highly atheistic, non-theistic at least. So America also, some parts of America are called the Bible Belt, but there are a lot of Christians who are concerned that America is just going towards materialism, nihilism, atheism, and do the Abrahamic faiths have a huge amount of influence in America? In some parts of America, a lot, but in some parts they're also being persecuted. So on issues like abortion or transgender and things like that. So it's not that the Abrahamic religions have a huge amount of influence, but what is happening is that as their influence in the West is waning, they are finding that Africa and India are huge fields for increasing the influence. In fact, there are some churches in America now. Earlier, there are churches in America which are actually importing pastors from India. Indians, people born in a Hindu background who become Christians, they go and become pastors in America. So it's like a reverse missionary effect, you can say. Instead of Western people coming as missionaries to India, Indians are going there also. So there is definitely the influence of Abrahamic religions. So, but it is not huge. Are they shaping Western policies towards India? At least at present, I would say the leftists are determining the narrative much more than Christians in the Abrahamic religions. Things were different maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, but now they're significantly changing. Having said that, yes, we sometimes focus more on, yes, all religions teach the same truth, all religions are the paths to the same one God. And yes, we could say that at one level, but there are two different things over here. One is acknowledging that different religions may have the same purpose. But despite having the same purpose, even if you acknowledge they have the same purpose, still there are irreducible differences. And one of the key definers of a tradition's capacity, for living in a multicultural world is how does it treat outsiders. See, every religion has some name for its outsiders. Christians will call them as pagans. The Muslims will call them as kafirs. In our tradition, we may call them as mlechas and yavanas. Every tradition has a name for them. But it's not just giving a name. how do we treat them? How do we deal with them? So yes, hardline Islam, hardline Christianity, they have a strongly negative attitude towards those whom they consider non-believers. And that's why sentimental, all religions are the same thing, that will not work. That is a strength of our tradition. So what I say is that there are three different kinds of tradition. There's inclusivism, there is exclusivism, and then there is pluralism. So we want to be open-minded, but we can't be so open-minded that our brains fall out. That to say that all paths are the same, that is not being open-minded, that is being empty-minded. So yes, there are significant differences, and we need to be aware of the threats and dangers from certain paths and certain conceptions in certain paths, and we need to prepare for dealing with those. I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think we'll stop here. I'll just make a few comments and then Jagdish can wrap it up.
Dr. Sankheji, you may wind up because I have raised my points to get some information. So not a problem. We have gone into 2024. You may wind up, and thanks Chaitanya Charanji for your excellent viewpoint. Dr. Sankhe, you may wind up.
So thank you, Chaitanya Charanji. So it was extremely stimulating scientific session, and this is what we try to do in Abhyasika, that our members, they get educated on various issues. Like, you really brought it out in an extremely scientific way, not just, being emotional and sentimental and, just getting outburst. So I'm very grateful to you for joining us, and maybe in future again, we'll invite you for some other session. And I thank Rajiv ji and Madhvi ji and Ishwar and whoever is helping to organize this. Madhvi ji, you can just take it ahead. Thank you, Chaitanya Charan.
Thank you, Dr. Sankhe ji, for inviting me.
Shall we rise for Vande Mataram?
Yes.
Rise for Vande. That's our last.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Shasya Shamalam, Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Jyotsna Pulakit Yamini, Pulla Kusumita Drumadala Shobhini, Suhasini Sumadhura Bhashini, Sukhadam Varadam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
Bharat
Mata ki jai.